So, welcome to the third day, and hasn't it been fantastic? I mean, even at the start of yesterday, the sun shone, which was great. It really has felt as if it was exactly the right mix of presentations, space for chatting, going out there, and a huge thank you again to Verity and her team for just getting it right. So, I'm simply flagging that some of our speakers have changed for today, and it isn't even as it says on the screen. So, for a second, I would like all of you to think about how you feel when you have a hire car. Okay, so you have filled in all the forms and you either turn up to collect it or it's outside or whatever. And it isn't the hire car that you asked for. It's a spec up. So today we have Dave Slater instead of Marion. We have Callum instead of Gareth, and also Ben, wherever he is speaking again instead of Rosie. So do enjoy the rest of today, and we're on the verge of seeing an absolutely fantastic video of the highlights. Okay, thank you.
Hello! Today it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the Dynamic Dunescapes final conference. Over the last couple of years we've been working hard to restore over 7,000 hectares of coastal sand dune in England and Wales. We've been supported of course by the National Lottery Heritage Fund and the EU LIFE programme, and project partners have been Natural England, Plantlife, National Trust, Natural Resources Wales and the Wildlife Trusts. We're looking forward now to spending a little bit of time having a look on all of the things we've achieved and how we've achieved them over the years. Thanks for joining us. The project has rejuvenated 186 hectares of sand dune. Activities have included willow and gorse removal, turf stripping to create bare sand, mowing, litter removal and stump removal. At Oxwich, Sefton Coast and Brompton boroughs, the excavation of large notches to allow wind-blown sand to rejuvenate the system behind the ford dunes has taken place. The project has bought a new tractor and flail with Cornwall Wildlife Trust and a soft track with Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust. In Cornwall and Devon, the MOD and the British Army have even lent a mechanical hand. 50 hectares of associated wetland rejuvenation has taken place, including pond creation and slack pool restoration. At National Trust Formby, 12 bare sand surrounded fresh pools were created, and in Cumbria, breeding pools have been restored and created for natterjack toads at Eskimills, Groon Point and Moorbrae Banks, where a recent monitoring walk recorded 80 adult toads. "116 hectares of invasive species of flora have been removed across project sites, including clematis, sea buckthorn and Japanese rose. Here you can see the Crookbank in Lincolnshire before and after clematis removal. Invasive carp have also been removed from a freshwater lake in Dorset. 360 hectares of new grazing regime have also been introduced, featuring Exmoor ponies in Cornwall and several herds of cattle trialling no-fence GPS collar technology in Cumbria, Dorset and Lincolnshire. Over 11,000 metres of new fencing has been installed across sites to facilitate new grazing regimes, and over 350 metres of new fencing has been installed to improve visitor infrastructure. In communications, we conservatively estimate that the project comms have reached over 27 million people. The Dynamic Dunescapes website has had more than 128,000 page views from 50,000 visitors and has facilitated over 3,500 resource downloads. National and local social media profiles on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram now have over 13,000 followers, supported by a YouTube channel, sharing videos from around the project, as well as public interest talks and student films.
So we get lots of orchids in dune slacks, and this is a good example of early marsh orchid, which is a little bit pinker than northern marsh orchid. You can sort of tell that these little ears at the top of the flower are sort of more vertical than in the northern marsh orchid.
My name's Sally Wallington and I'm the project officer for the Dynamic Dunescapes project here down on the National Trust land at Studland Bay. So one of the aims of the project is to reintroduce cattle with the idea that they will eat the purple moor grass, graze down the vegetation to prevent it from going to scrub and woodland. The reason for this is to protect and enhance our great populations of things like sand lizards.
Nearly 40 press releases have been issued so far in English and Welsh, and the project is featured in over 120 print or online media articles, including in The Guardian, The Times, The Sunday Times, The Telegraph, Coast Magazine, Countryman Magazine, and a range of regional publications. 8 radio interviews have taken place, and we've been part of over 10 TV appearances, including In the Lakes with Simon Reeve, BBC Breakfast, Country File, Morning Live, and ITV News. Over 80 temporary signage posters have been created throughout the project, with 8 semi-permanent interpretation boards installed at SAC sites. The engagement team has also been a busy one, organising myriad public events for nearly 90,000 participants, from dance classes and photography workshops in the dunes to bio-blitzes, dog walking cafes, guided walks, litter picks, painting and drawing classes, online talks, craft activities and art exhibitions. Dune dens have been used over 250 times. 54 events have been held for older people living with dementia and their carers, 63 for dog walkers, and 150 held specifically for young people. Over 5,000 school pupils have been engaged with the project, as well as over 500 teachers, and 450 students have worked on the John Muir Award with us. The team have also worked on engaging other stakeholders, such as golf course managers and local community groups, and established volunteer groups to help improve the dunes, from helping with practical works and monitoring to checking the health of our grazing ponies. The engagement team have also been the face of the project, representing Dynamic Dunescapes in the media and presenting skills improvement resource videos and online talks. The Dynamic Dunescapes skills development activities have engaged a range of stakeholders. Starting with young people, there have been 600 participants in on-site learning and training sessions and over 4,700 young people in taster events. The project has offered 47 placement opportunities to students, and 59 student researchers have worked on projects like Ben Lamb in South Wales and Ashley Toomey in Cumbria.
So I'm Ben Lamb. I'm currently a third year biology student, and last year I did my year in industry, helping manage and do some research on these sand dunes. It was a wonderful time, but that's where my Dunescapes bursary came in. Here we are at one of the places that I did a bit of research on. This is a newly regenerated dune slack.
My name's Ashley Toomey. I'm doing a project funded by Dynamic Dunescapes on the effects of cattle grazing here at Mowbray and the impact that it has on the natterjack toad habitat.
The project has also supported 3 apprentices, including Pip at Cornwall Wildlife Trust.
Hi, I'm Pip. I work for Cornwall Wildlife Trust, and as part of the Dynamic Dunescapes project, we've set up Cornwall Dunes Recording Group, and we'd love you to come and be a part of it.
Speaking of volunteering, 779 new volunteering opportunities have been created, involving 4,500 volunteers and amounting to over 6,200 days of volunteer activity. Video resources were created for volunteers and citizen scientists, detailing identifying dune habitats and how to undertake monitoring activities.
Blowouts occur where there's already vegetation. So typically this might be in Four Dunes area, or it could be further back in the dune system, like here in some of the older vegetated dunes.
Where these areas are low enough to meet the dune water table, freshwater pools form. Dune slacks usually flood in winter and dry out in summer, and it's this annual fluctuation that gives the habitats their high biodiversity status.
Today we're going to have a look at how you measure a dip well for the Dynamic Dunescapes Citizen Science Project.
To be able to do this survey, you'll need a few things. The first is a GPS, which you can either download an app on your phone or have a handheld GPS unit.
The Dynamic Dunescapes app was developed for use by volunteers and citizen scientists working with site leads, as well as resources and toolkits such as the Dynamic Dunescapes Sand Dune Manager's Handbook, available to download from our website, and a series of online public and site manager e-learning modules, available in English and Welsh. A range of case studies for engagement and management practices are also being created and shared on the project website. Collaboration has also been a key aim of the project, both internally within our organisations, across the project partnership and beyond. Online monthly site lead meetings allow for presentations and knowledge sharing across the Dynamic Dunescapes sites. Once COVID regulations allowed travel, in-person site visits and workshops within the project have taken place, and we've hosted visitors from other projects, including Sands of Life from Wales and Life Dunas from Portugal. Finally, with Sands of Life and with Project Legacy in mind, Dynamic Dunescapes helped to establish World Sand Dune Day, an annual celebration of dunes that now takes place all around the world, facilitating collaboration with other UK nature organisations, dune restoration projects in places including Ireland and the Netherlands, as well as tourism boards and national parks as far as the United States.
It's amazing to see just how much we've achieved in a few short years, and we'd like to say a massive thank you to everyone for all of their hard work across the project. We are leaving dunes more resilient than when we found them, and if you'd like to know how we did this and to find out more in our case studies, head to our website dynamicdunescapes.co.uk.
Welcome to the final session of the conference. I'm Callum Deveney. I'm Head of Nature Reserves at Cornwall Wildlife Trust, and I've been on the project steering group for the project since the start of the project, representing not just Cornwall Wildlife Trust, but the three wildlife trusts that are involved in this project. And this final session is about presentations or talks from the project partners, talking about over the horizon, looking beyond the dune ridge, or looking through the notches. So we're looking. The project's come to an end. It's done some fantastic work that we've heard about over the last few days, but we're looking beyond the end of the project and what our organisations can I'd say, use the word commit loosely, but what our vision is for our work with sand dunes beyond this project. So we've got a number of people to come up and talk about that, and then we'll have a Q&A session sitting around here. So first of all, I'd like to introduce from Natural England, Dave Slater, who's going to come up and talk to us. Dave.
So I'm Dave Slater. I might be the least knowledgeable about sand dunes in this room. I'm an ecologist, but it was way back a long time ago, and it was mostly about mammals. So I apologise in advance. I want to give you my perspective on why this project is so important amongst the bigger challenge that we have on nature recovery. So, as was mentioned earlier, I'm a late replacement for Marion Spain, our Chief Executive, and I'm really looking forward to telling her a bit later this week why she's a lower spec rental car than me. And I want to apologise in advance because of some of the last minute changes we've had to make. The panel's not the most diverse panel you've ever seen. Yeah, so we're aware of that, and we'll hopefully compensate them. So I heard a few things. I've rewritten my speech on the basis of this fantastic panel discussion we had earlier and the knowledge I accumulated in the last hour. I heard the word gobsmacked, which is exactly how I felt after driving through the roadworks from South Devon this morning and coming over the hill and seeing the dunes. I mean, truly spectacular and inspiring in every way. It certainly did for me. I think this I was in the early days of Dynamic Dunescapes, so I was the lead Natural England director, and in those early days, I rapidly came up with a strategy for Dynamic Dunescapes, which was get out of Verity's way, just let her get on, and she did, you know, and she created some magic which, you know, many of you in the room have been part of. You know, I sat in a room yesterday with all the regional directors and regional representatives of the different environmental organisations, the Trust, Wildlife Trust, RSPB, Environment Agency, and we talked about how are we going to deliver nature recovery in the southwest region. You know, how are we going to do it? Where do we need to focus our efforts? And I think, you know, 30% by 2030, well managed for nature. It's daunting. It's really daunting. And I think if you add up SSIs and you add up, you know, the agri-environment schemes and all the other things, we really struggle to get beyond 11%. That is what a stonking gap that is to fill. You know, really, really challenging. And I think we all agreed that the only way we were going to reach that target was by innovation, taking risks, working on big projects involving big dynamic processes, of which the coast, obviously, is a major contender. There are others. And I think, as was alluded to this morning, you know, public policy and legislation and the way that we've organised ourselves around protected sites in the UK doesn't always lend itself to that, doesn't always lend itself to those big decisions. And also, we're quite risk averse. I think, you know, we require a lot of evidence to make decisions. Somebody mentioned the time it takes for us to issue a licence or get a consent, do habitat rate assessments. You know, so one of the things that I come across, and you know, we're having a big debate with the Environment Agency about Dawlish Warren at the moment and the future, which is down, for those of you not from this area, that's down the XS Street. You know, and it's this we're having this classic debate with a lot of organisations at the moment. Do we go with natural processes? Do we go with nature-based solutions? Or do we stick with the tried and tested methodologies, many of which involve concrete and a huge amount of public expenditure? And I think, and things are getting better, and I think, you know, I was in a ministerial meeting last week where there was, you know, huge local lobby to protect a part of the coast, as, you know, is often the case, but ministers were supportive of letting it go to a more natural place. You know, so things are changing, but I think for me, the barrier between us being able to take those kind of decisions, so really good long-term, as we heard this morning, you know, trust that natural processes and more naturalistic management, low intervention management, is evidence. It's evidence, really, and not just evidence, not just data, but persuasive evidence. Evidence that you've gone out, you've done it, you've tried it, it works, or at least it works in those kinds of places. And I think we've got a bit of a schism at the moment. We've got an ambitious target for nature recovery, but we're lacking a bit of that persuasive evidence, and we've got a bit of a risk-averse culture. So the more that we can show it works in practice, you know, the better. So projects like Dynamic Dunescapes and other projects like it, absolutely fantastic, exemplars. I mean, I felt a bit emotional actually watching that film this morning, you know. And certainly the diversity of that film actually conquered the diversity on our panel, I should say. And that's, you know, I just thought, look at all these people, you know, different logos on their shirts, absolutely as one, collaborating, but also exchanging ideas, innovating. You know, when NASA decided to go to the moon, it had to completely redesign NASA because into different teams with different perspectives. Diversity of thought and innovation is absolutely the key to how we come up with these great new ideas, and then test them, and as someone said earlier, you know, find out what doesn't work, and then tell everybody, find out what works, and then test it on science. So, you know, I know Ian's going to talk about this in a bit, but, you know, I would say, yes, Natural England is totally committed to the future of protecting dunes in this country, but also I think we can take the learning from this project to deliver on lots of other habitats. I think it's been an amazing testing ground for how collaboration works in practice, the interaction between all of you, the exchanging of ideas, It's just fantastic. It's exemplar. It's best practice for me. And just fantastic. So I think, my final thoughts really on. I've missed out one section. The other important thing about Dynamic Dunescapes is obviously about people. What we're doing at the moment in Natural England and with our partners is going to local communities, trying to get them to get behind the idea that we need to create more habitat, that we'll need to make some sacrifices and compromises around development in order to deliver sort of robust nature in cities and towns. The idea that the public and people get into and are able to access and are able to understand. You have 90,000 people come to the events just on Dynamic Dunescapes. I mean, that's a huge number. You've reached 27.7 million people through the media. I mean, those are, not everybody will have listened, but a lot of them will be going away thinking, actually, there's real value in protecting these habitats. And from my point of view, whose job it is to try and implement government policy and trying to, reach those nature recovery targets, that's a huge bonus. It makes it much easier to really engage local communities and get funding and make those slightly risky decisions. Get them support. So I suppose I'm going to finish by saying, for me, Dynamic Dunescapes now is all about. It's not just about what you've done. I mean, there's 108 hectares of dune habitat that's been protected through, but it's so much more than that. The legacy of Dynamic Dunescapes is a lot of it's in this room. It's all you people who are going to go on to careers with that knowledge, and you'll be passing that on in future projects. I mean, that's just an amazing legacy just by itself, but also the learning. And I think I was talking to Verity this morning about what the next year looks like for Dynamic Dunescapes. I think it's got to be about the legacy, hasn't it? It's got to be about more than a moment in time. I think, I've been in nature conservation for about 25 years, and I see a lot of projects that make short-term positive impacts, but as soon as they're taken away, sort of things drift back. And I think that's got to be the mentality, I think, now, just saying, right, how do we make sure we secure the gains, but also how do we spread this so it doesn't become, as someone on the panel said earlier, it doesn't become sort of a bespoke project that requires loads and loads of funding every time and loads of intervention. It needs to be sort of built into whatever the plans are for that area. If you see my little yellow light, I've got about 30 seconds left. So I'm seeing opportunity and hope for nature recovery, but we need to be able to take more risk and we need better evidence. I've got people knocking on my door, private industry wanting to create intertidal habitat, coastal habitat for their net zero targets. I need more evidence to convince them and pension funds and all the other green finance money that we could be utilising, but the evidence needs to improve, and it's projects like this where you tested the evidence and you really grow. So, Natural is absolutely committed, not just because we like data and science, but because it will make a real difference. I think that's it. Am I done?
Okay, thank you, Dave. So I'm another high car upgrade. You were going to hear from Steve Trotter, who's the Chief Executive of Cumbria Wildlife Trust. But you're hearing from me. I'm having to remind myself of my own name, so I'm Callum Deveney. Because for those of you that were here earlier in the week, I was Nick Marriott doing another talk, so my second standing talk. I'm talking on behalf of the Wildlife Trust. So there are 3 wildlife trusts that have been involved in the delivery of Dynamic Dunescapes, and that's Cumbria, Lincolnshire and Cornwall. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to do it through a kind of lens of some of the work that we have done as the project, but looking at how that actually will lead to a legacy and what we're going to continue to beyond the project. So I'm not going to bombard you with loads of slides because I know you've had lots of slide presentations, but very quickly to help me. So some in terms of site management, consistent with Lincolnshire, Cornwall and Cumbria, there are certain themes, key things that we focused on. And one of them has been grazing, and things that we've achieved. I've kind of summed it up in terms of no fence and no chance. So the no chance was the sites where we thought we had absolutely no chance of grazing, and yet we managed to achieve it. And the reason we achieved it was because of the people engagement work we did. And then the no fence was obviously the technology that has been adopted through the project, and has meant that we've been able to graze projects that we weren't previously that we weren't previously grazing. Bare sand. So we've seen a lot about bare sand, and we've been out at Braunton Burrows and seen the bare sand work there. So that's, again, it's been a very common link between the three wildlife trusts. And actually in Cornwall, we weren't doing any bare sand work before Dynamic Dunescape. So if we think about how we've moved on, how different sites have moved on, we will continue now to do bare sand work in Cornwall. Machinery, so a really important part of the project has been the acquisition and the purchase of machinery, and of course when you buy machinery that gives you legacy for your site for ongoing management. So this is a soft track that Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust were able to buy, so a very specific piece of kit that will work in a number of different habitats. It's got very low ground pressure, but that's been a fantastic acquisition for them that they probably wouldn't have been able to buy without Dynamic Dunescapes, but they'll have it long term to continue the great management that they're doing. Likewise, Cornwall Wildlife Trust, we purchased a tractor as part of this project, and that has meant that we've been able to do scrub clearance, we've been able to drag big water bowsers into the middle of the sand dunes so that we can have grazing, and that's going to continue beyond the project. So looking to the future, equipment that's been bought by Dynamic Dunescapes will continue to be used. This is the soft track working at Lincolnshire, clearing invasives. I won't say an alien invasive because the sea buckthorn isn't alien in Lincolnshire. I'm learning all the time, and I think that's been a really important part of the project has been learning, and so a lot of invasives works and a lot of learning as we've gone along. And it was interesting yesterday, Richard from Cumbria was talking about the Rosa rugosa work that he had to do, was looking at having to do, and he went to Sefton, talked to the site managers at Sefton, and ended up going back to Cumbria using the same contractor that worked on the Rosa rugosa in Sefton, and so that best practice sharing has been a real success of the project, and I think will also be a real legacy. And that's true of Cornwall Wildlife Trust as well, so our staff have been up to Sefton to look at the notching in preparation for the notching that we're going to do in Cornwall. And a lot of that best practice has sort of come together in the Dune Manager's Handbook, and that was talked about in the session before, what a fantastic resource that has been, but is going to continue to be for sand dune management in the future. And I think it was Louise who talked about that handbook in one of the sessions yesterday, and I know that Louise has been talking to site managers. So Louise works for Natural England, has been involved in the development of the environmental land management schemes, and particularly the sand dune options, or is part of that process. And so feedback from site managers are helping to build those elm schemes. So it's possible, it's not guaranteed, but it's possible there may be capital items within elms that could do notching in the future, that could help pay for no-graze fencing in the future. So we've had a big injection of cash through Dynamic Dunescape project, and we sometimes think, well, where's the funding coming from in the future? If there's the most sort of common form of site management is stewardship at the moment, it will be elms in the future. If that's paying to help that management, then that's a fantastic thing to think will happen in the future, or to hope will happen in the future. Just very, very quickly, natterjack toad. We don't have natterjack toads in Cornwall, but just some of the successes of both Cumbria and Lincolnshire have done a lot of work for natterjack toads. I knew that was on there, I didn't mean to do it, but I obviously never get an opportunity to do that. The fact that there are no natterjack toads in Cornwall, so assuming that was one. So this is just very briefly some sort of successes in one of the Lincolnshire sites in the project. So an increase in natterjack toad numbers as the works happen through the project. I've been told to treat these numbers with caution as directly relating the management work that's happened in the nuts. The same with a lot of species. Sometimes it's hard to tie down exactly why they've responded, but you've got to take your wins where you can. I also learned at dinner last night there's a whole competitive world of natterjack toads and who's got more and who hasn't, and there was even allegations of cheating with some of these numbers, so I won't go into that. But one thing, and it came up again yesterday when we were talking about community and engagement, was that for local people to value their dunes, it's very important that they can associate it with sort of key species and things that they can relate to. Someone did suggest that people can get excited about petal work, which I thought was stretching things a little bit too far. But yeah, natterjack toads. I think in the community work that we've done, the brilliant community work that we've done, sort of singing about the successes and relating that, why have we cut this big area of scrub down? It's because it's having a direct effect on numbers. It's been a real success. And monitoring, so Cumbria has done some fantastic work with citizen science, so getting local people involved, starting to monitor those successes, but bringing in local people, bringing in volunteers to help monitor those successes. So that's happened in Cumbria with some monitoring the sort of changing in profile and vegetation cover, and these are 10-year programmes, so already you're looking beyond Dynamic Dunescapes, because this work will continue for 10 years. So it's brilliant that we've had the establishment of these groups. And then the last thing there I thought was quite interesting. This was an adopt a sand dune from a local school, and again getting that kind of buy-in from the local community. And in Cornwall we've had some sort of fantastic days out on the dunes with school groups, and that's a teacher there with the school kids who had an absolutely wonderful time running around the dunes and learning about sand dunes. And you quite often hear in Cornwall, I quite often write it in funding bids, that kids from some of the sort of more deprived areas of Cornwall have never actually been to the coast, never been to the seaside. So it's fantastic that our people engagement work has made that happen. And that has been a massive success of the project. The fact that we've had people engagement officers working closely with local communities. It's probably one of those areas where you think, or we're losing a resource, those staff are finishing, and you think, well, the worry would be how are we going to continue with this work. But I think that work has been so successful. They've put so much sort of into their local communities. That they've forged partnerships, they've set up monitoring groups, and those monitoring groups will continue. So that's a real fantastic legacy. So I just wanted to finish by thanking, I won't list the people engagement officers for this project. Have been amazing, so thank you. And I've gone red.
So I'm another late substitution, unfortunately. Gareth O'Shea, our Executive Director, was planning to come down today, but he's not been able to make it. He is very committed to the project. He was involved in the launch back in 2019 of the Sounds of Life, and has really been interested in this, particularly because of the community involvement. And I believe he's planning to come along to our conference next year. So he's a great supporter of the project. I think I've got some slides here. They run through. Other way, okay. Yeah, there we go. Great. So I'm just going to say a bit really about NRW's kind of sand dune journey and where we might go in future. We understood really about 20 years ago that there were really serious problems with our sand dunes in Wales. We'd seen the decline of many species, and the most kind of totemic species is the fen orchid, probably for us in Wales. Obviously really used to be, present on many of our dunes around South Wales, and of course was also present at Broughton Burrows. But it had completely disappeared certainly by the 2000s. It was only present on Kenfig dunes. So it was a real kind of canary in the mine, really, to say we've got real problems with our dunes. And we knew that you only have to look at those air photos to see that the lack of mobile sand was a key issue. But we didn't really understand kind of what to do with it, to be honest. How do we address these issues? But kind of because of networks like this, we really started to learn, and I think we particularly learned from our colleagues in the Netherlands, was going over there, some of our staff went over there and saw what the likes of Luke and Mark were doing in the Netherlands was really inspiring, and really kind of, drove us to start carrying out works in Wales. And that was a really big step, and quite a scary step. And I'm sure many of you have gone through the same process of, we started, we planned works at Kenfig and did a really big scrape there. And I was terrified, because I thought we were going to get a huge public backlash against that. But it kind of went really well. The scrape went well. It was kind of in a relatively remote place, so we didn't have much public complaints. So that was, really amazing, to be honest. And as a result of that, that kind of spurred us on to do more. We did works at Newborough, we did works at Merthyr Mawr, similar kind of notching. That's been a real, huge step forwards, and led us to realise that, gosh, we need to do more of this, and kind of led us to start to think about how do we get the funding in to do these kind of projects. So it led on to our discussions with Natural England, partly led to Dynamic Dunes. We had our own project, Sands of Life, and so we've really moved forward, I think. We've had a lot of challenges, Brexit, the dreaded issue of UXOs, which we really kind of miss. We didn't realise quite how much of an issue it was on so many of our dunes, and that's kind of really, kind of slowed down the project, but we've now kind of found a way of addressing that, and we're happy to work on these dunes and do kind of notching once the area's been surveyed for UXO. So that's been a kind of real big lesson for us, to be honest. And so I think, the projects have really now put us in a really great place. We've really understood, kind of where we need to go, and we're starting to have a response, because we've sort of maybe picked up that we've now gone up to kind of thousands of fen orchids at Kenfig, so massive kind of reversal of what was a really declining trend. And then this year, fen orchids also being present again in their hundreds at Whitford Borough. So I don't know if that was the first time for probably 30 years or something like that we found fen orchids at Whitford Boroughs, but also at Larne as well. So that's been, an incredible achievement, really, to get a really rare and kind of totemic, iconic plant back, and demonstrates we're really, kind of doing the right thing, I think. We're really lucky in Wales that I think we've got the government's really behind us. They're really the kind of Wellbeing and Future Generations Act and the Environment Act have enshrined the ecosystem approach in law, and means that everybody in the public sector should be acting for nature and climate. And that's a real powerful tool for us. And it's led on to, led on to a lot of government support. So they've declared a nature emergency, it has been declared in Wales. And even, kind of stick with me on this, even our corporate plan, which, to be honest, I kind of never really looked at in the past and never actually reflected anything that I did. But actually, for this time, for once, actually, nature is recovering is one of the number one thing in our corporate plan. So, I'm so pleased about that, because it gives us real power to move forwards, and some funding as well. So, and I kind of think the Dynamic Dunes projects and Sands of Life projects have been really important in that, in demonstrating what can be achieved, and has really helped with our thinking in Natural Resources Wales. We've a huge amount of work has gone into the sand dunes, particularly addressing. We've heard about the invasive species. Ruth's work at Pembrey with sea buckthorn. A lot of work around in other parts of the coast at Anglesey and Crumlin with all sorts of garden escapees. We've addressed many of those, but we know, as we heard from the discussion this morning, we've got lots more to do. The importance of grazing, we've spent through the Sands of Life project, we've spent hundreds of thousands on fencing to get grazing back, and through Dynamic Dunes we're doing works on grazing as well. So, but obviously we know that's crucial to kind of maintenance of the dune swards. The Dynamic Dunescapes arts element has been kind of real an eye-opener to me, to be honest. I'm really the least arty person ever, I have to say. But at the moment, we've got some really good works going ahead with some metal archways, which will be at Crumlin and Baglan through the project, which will, be gateway features for those sites. And those links with the local community, the interest in the archways, kind of links with our industrial heritage in those areas of South Wales are really important. And it's kind of, again, made Natural Resources Wales think about our links to the arts and to communities through the arts. And that wouldn't have happened without Dynamic Dunescapes. Another of our kind of key objectives for the coming probably 10 years for Natural Resources Wales is preventing pollution. And of course, a lot of our work is related to pollution in rivers, of which there's been a huge outcry over the last few years. Maybe not such an issue for our sand dunes, although maybe the areas to the rear of the sand dunes, those wet areas, it can be. But an increasing issue for us, I think we're becoming increasingly aware of, is atmospheric nitrogen. And that's certainly an issue on a number of our sand dune sites. And so we're planning to have all of our sand dune sites through Sands of Life, potentially some of the ones through Dynamic Dunes, will have site nitrogen action plans to try to address this kind of pernicious issue. So it's really, really kind of woken us up that this is a major issue that we need to start addressing. So we've got I think we've got a fantastic start, but it is a start what we've done so far. There's so much more we need to do in future. These issues we discussed this morning about how do we move towards kind of more self-sustaining dune systems. Can we ever get to that point? So that is something I really want to try and move towards in future on some of our larger dune sites. But also some of the discussions I've had during the last few days has really raised this issue about going beyond the dunes. We know that our dunes are in places are going to be eroded, they need to be able to roll back, but we also need to be looking at those wetland areas to the rear of the dunes. So Braunton's a classic example of, the dunes end and then you're into quite intensively farmed agricultural fields, which were once wetland areas, which were once intricately linked into our dunes. So over the next few years, how do we kind of move into those areas? When those areas are really important for farmers, they're really high value, but how can we address those issues? I think that's a key one for us about this whole kind of landscape scale approach and just moving out beyond the dunes. A big issue for Natural Resources Wales is no doubt kind of pines on dunes, and how do we move forwards with that issue in future? Kath showed some of her fantastic work and team's fantastic work in removing pines from dunes at Harlech, but there's a lot of pines on dunes, and it's a really controversial issue removing of any of those dunes. So what do we do about that, and how do we move forwards there? So I think we've got some really big challenges in the future, but the projects have been really fantastically successful. Keeping the momentum going over the next 5-10 years and 50 years probably is going to be crucial. But I think we've had a really good start, and I think Dynamic Dunes has been absolutely fantastic in achieving that. So thanks very much.
Hello again. It's great to have the opportunity to look forward over the sand dune ridge, and I want to kind of take us through kind of 5 major opportunities that I think the National Trust is certainly committed to, and I hope and I'm confident you are all committed to. But a kind of reflective point maybe, which is that the opportunities are as good as our imagination. And with a significant proportion of sand dune practitioners in the audience here today, we've got everything to go for. And we just need to adopt the imagination, the flair, the commitment, the drive that led to Dynamic Dunes and Sands of Life, and this fantastic work which has been delivered through this project again, so that we can continue the good progress. So 5 things, 5 opportunities. The first one is around proper planning. The second one is around being big, bold and frankly brave. The third one is kind of regulatory red tape. The fourth is monitoring, and the fifth is how we maintain the momentum. But first, kind of maybe a bit of a reflection about why the National Trust has been involved and why we want to be involved in the future. We organisationally recognise the nature and climate emergencies as our biggest corporate threat to our charitable purpose. And we're building on our strategy with kind of a steely focus on delivering against that kind of nature, climate and people agenda. And I think we're well placed to do so. About 20% of our estate across England, Wales and Northern Ireland is within a stone's throw of the coast. We've got about 780 miles of coastline under our stewardship, and that covers all typologies, but including sand dunes, and we've got over 2,000 hectares of sand dunes, about 4% of the UK resource. And it shouldn't be a surprise, and it isn't a surprise, that actually this coastal strip is where we find most of our threatened species and some of our most important wildlife and nature conservation interests. So we are committed. We want to continue to build on the progress made through this project and really to learn the lessons. So what are those opportunities? Proper planning. I just don't think we do it very well, frankly. And I say that with some guilt and regret, having been in this sector for a number of years. But we just need to get better at proper strategic planning so we can really understand the dynamic nature of our coastlines, not least under the future climate change scenarios, and where the real opportunities are to not only maintain our existing extent, but to allow things like rollback and to secure the benefits that healthy, vibrant sand dunes offer both to nature and to people. The second opportunity is this one about being braver together and being bold and acting big. Has anyone ever regretted not being big enough? I don't think so. And it's inspiring to hear from our European colleagues and partners of their really ambitious programmes and what can be done with the right attitude and the right focus. So, of course, we need to sometimes temper our enthusiasm for sand dune conservation with the serious issues of things like flood risk and coastal management. But notwithstanding that need for serious consideration of these local constraints, too often we are just not big enough and bold enough in our delivery. We've congratulated ourselves over the last few days, and quite rightly so, about our innovative approach to sand dune conservation, which is built on a legacy of action both here and abroad. But we mustn't lose sight that our innovation is tomorrow's business as usual. And there's a constant demand, a constant challenge to keep on innovating in this space so we meet some of the challenges that we heard from the panel earlier this morning. The third opportunity is one of regulatory red tape, and we heard the frustration that many of the delivery partners, certainly in the National Trust, has had navigating the red tape. And someone who's quite fluent in this regulatory web of challenges, it's incredibly frustrating that sometimes it feels like we're our worst own enemies. But there's a huge opportunity, as Paul said earlier this morning, because the government is rewriting the rule book. We've come out of Brexit, the Habitats Directive is in great jeopardy, and our challenge is to work out how we want to replace it. And there's an opportunity for each of us as individuals to engage in that process, as well as providing our organisational might to these government consultations. So what do we want? I think we need to build on the elegance that I think the Habitat Directive provides, but I think it needs to be more permissive. It's a nonsense, frankly, that we're having to go through some of the hoops and hurdles to do a project funded by Europe to deliver the conservation objectives set out in the Habitats Directive. I asked the question, why isn't this work deemed necessary for the management of the site? Look at Europe. They're much more adept at managing the legislation to achieve good outcomes, absolutely in the spirit of the directive. I must say, and this isn't a kind of cheap pop, but I think there is a critical role for statutory consultees. You have a different place at this table, and we need greater leadership from those statutory authorities for giving the blessing and support and providing the leadership and encouragement to typically local planning authorities to enable these big projects to go through. We cannot afford to take the months and months of effort to get permission to get on and do our delivery. The fourth issue was and opportunities around monitoring, and I'm pleased to say there's a great monitoring framework which is writ large across the Dynamic Dunes project, and we need to get on and collect that data, because what that is going to provide the foundations for the evidence base which is going to enable us to continue delivering on the ground. And the final piece is around momentum, and I want to take up the opportunity and kind offer from Paul around the network. It's a fit-for-purpose vehicle which has done great work historically, and it enables us to continue the discussion together and with new partners to build and test the evidence base and train and support sand dune managers in the future. So finally, I think there's great opportunity. It's in our gift, and we just need to be bold and courageous and take it. Thank you.
So it's great to be here, and it's particularly great to be here on the site where Plantlife has been so actively involved. And right from the beginning, I would just like to say I feel rather sort of daunted standing here in front of some of my team with Rupert and Hannah and Al because of the extraordinary work that's been undertaken here. But these moments in time are really interesting in multiple ways. And what I'd like to do is just reflect a little bit on some of the words on the screen here. And I'm going to particularly pick up on dynamic, and I'm going to pick up on dunes. And with some of our European colleagues here with us today, the derivation of the word dune, probably from sort of the 18th century, is a mound, ridge or hill of loose heaped sand, or sand heaped up by the wind near the sea. And I'd just like you to hold that definition of a dune whilst I sort of go through the next sort of few minutes and I develop some of the thinking. And then I'd like you to hold as well the term dynamic, because the world ahead of us is going to be extraordinarily dynamic. And it's going to be dynamic from an energy point of view. Climate warming means there's more energy in systems. And that is going to give us huge challenges in our coastal regions. It's going to give us huge challenges around our sand dunes, our dunescapes. We are going to lose some of our dunescapes. But what I would like you to reflect upon as an exemplar project is what this means for us in many different ways. And I was chatting this morning with one of the residents in the hotel who wasn't part of the conference. And she said to me, "What time are you all leaving? Because I want to beat you to the checkout." And then, so we got chatting and she said, "Well, what are you doing here?" I said, "We're working particularly on dunescapes and sand dunes." And she said, "I've been coming to this hotel for the last 20 years. And I'm really delighted you're here doing that because I can see the damage we've done over those years. And the amount of bare sand is horrific." And I was thinking, well, what a wonderful opportunity for me to say something to somebody who's not a local resident. She's not part of our echo chamber here. She's one of the visitors. She came from outside. And I said to her, well, in fact, it's the reverse. What we're trying to do is to get more bare sand, and I'll show you one of the pictures, you probably saw it earlier. And she said to me, "I would never have known that, and I'm going to change what I do with my grandchildren. And every year my grandchildren come to stay with me, I stop them running around the dunes. And I'm now going to let them run around the dunes." And I thought, well, what a great outcome. I've only been here for a day and a half, but that's one outcome. I'm pretty pleased with it. But it was really interesting that perspective. So you can look at these projects historically, in the moment, and going forward. I'm not going to go through a lot of what's been said already. This categorically is the beginning of something that has to be a fundamentally different approach to how we are running ecosystems, habitats, landscapes around the UK, but more widely as well. So we cannot see this as the end. And I was talking with Hannah and the team, and I think something about 95% of the Dunescapes team will eventually disappear over the next year or so. And we can't allow that to be seen as a negative. That has to be seen as a positive. I'm just going to go back to something that Sue said when this was setting up. So this is what we were setting ourselves as the target: to restore a more open, dynamic nature to the UK's coastal sand dunes, securing their distinctive landscapes into a changeable future for people, for the many characteristics of plants and animals that depend upon them. So there's an awful strong essence here of what this project was set up to deliver, and has delivered with remarkable success. And I'm going to use it as an exemplar, we've heard about that, and as a catalyst for some of the changes we want to be looking at going forward. So, I mentioned that you can look in the moment, you can look back, you can look forward. Photograph, I think Rupert told me, from about the 1940s, you've probably seen this before. This is a true dunescape. It's sand, it's clear sand, it's by the coast, it's wind, dynamically changing in this true sense. And to me it was a remarkable reminder of how you can lose generational memory. And we measure nature by our experience of nature. And we are uniquely in this room in a position to change that dialogue, because today's nature is not the reference point that we can take forward for future generations. You know, this is where we are now, pretty much. That's, what are we talking about? That's 80 years. That's one lifespan of change, a fundamentally different looking ecosystem. And this is where we've worked over this project. And you can see the 23 hectares of scrape down at the bottom where we were yesterday. This represents about 2.4% of the area of Northern Boroughs that we've worked on, with all of the energy and the cost and the fabulous outcome is 2.4%. From a UK habitat perspective, this is 0.002% of the UK's sand dunes that we've worked on. And you can look at that and you can say, well, that's a really depressing stat. I look at it and I say, what a fabulous stat that we've been able to work on this amount, and it tells us what we can deliver going forward. And here's a couple of quotes. There is so much variety of life in such a small space, and Hannah pulled this quote out for me. If we can demonstrate so much variety of life in such a small space, just imagine what we can do in bigger spaces. And that is really, really exciting. And of course, being the Chief Executive of Plantlife, I've got to mention that plants are part of it. Plants are at the foundation of every one of our terrestrial successful ecosystems, and we have to understand plants to be there. So, a few final thoughts before we head into some of the discussion. It's been a superb project, it's been an exemplar project, but there's an awful lot to do, and you've heard that. And I'm going to suggest that a lot of what can be done can be supported by all of you in this room, irrespective of what you go on to do next. There's an awful lot about people, and in the end, and you've heard about this, we do have to have the conservation science, and we need to know the biology of our plants. We need to know the biology of the inverts and the mammals. There's also a lot of applied science, but we have to become experts at the social science. And you've seen that in this program, how we are working with people to change agendas, to change people's thinking, to enable them to be active in a different way. So you have to, and we have to, take that social science capability combined with the applied conservation work, combined with the conservation evidence, the hard science, the data, and we have to bring that together in a dynamic way to enable the kind of change we're looking for going forward. Now, I will also suggest that means we need to work fundamentally on the economics. And that's with the statutory bodies, it's with the funders, it's with the economic systems that enable us to recognise the value of nature in a different way. And we can do an awful lot of what we've been doing here on this project, but if we do not enable a change in the fundamental economics of nature, we will not enable the kind of change that we need to be seeing going forward. So how do we take the learnings of the funding we've spent, the money we've spent, how we've spent it, and convey that as a value proposition that makes people think, right, I'm prepared to spend more money on nature because of the value it brings to us. So, we need the conservation science, the hard science, the species science, the data. We need the applied science, we need the social science, we need the economics, and we need the communication skills. And only if we can bring those 5 aspects together do we get the dynamism in our systems to protect nature and restore it going forward. Dynamic Dunescapes project is an exemplar of how we've done that, and we need to build off that. And I would argue, going into my last slide, because I've also got red, is that what we are doing on Dunescapes, you can apply to every single habitat in the UK. It applies to our grasslands, it applies to our temperate rainforests, it applies to our broadleaf rainforests, to our peatlands, to our montane habitats, to our coastal habitats. In every single one of those habitats, the approach we've taken within Dynamic Dunescapes will have success. And we need to be using that and building off that right across all of the habitats in the UK. Thank you.
Luke Gillen again. We have had the CLP meeting in Montreal, and they came up with the approach of the 30-30-30 rule. So 30% of the area should be protected under nature laws or something. It should be reached in 2030, and everybody should go to the nature within 30, the last 30, I don't know, 30 minutes, 30 meters, something like that. How are you doing in England in that approach?
Will you start? How are we doing against the 30? I mean, I think we're not doing great at the moment. Biodiversity is still in decline. I mean, and I think there is a real risk that a target like this could be faked. You know, greenwashing, it could be, because a lot of the calculations were done just on the basis of the size of, say, protected landscapes like national parks and things like that. You know, that they added it all together and they think, well, 30%, that seems about right. But we all know that a lot of these areas are full of quite intensive agriculture. So how are we doing? Not great. But as I said in my speech, I think there's sort of room for optimism. I think there are opportunities now to put funding into restoring habitat that didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago. And there's a political will in the UK at least that didn't exist, or at least the 25-year environment plan and the recent changes to legislation and the environmental improvement plan, which is a government policy, is pretty strong and pretty ambitious and actually quite exciting. So I think the things that didn't exist maybe 20, 30 years ago when we were really struggling are there now. So there's room for some optimism, but I think it's a long, hard road ahead. And as I said, it's going to require quite a lot of risk-taking and partnership to get there.
Yeah, I think if we're really honest, we're in a pretty poor state. In England, the stats vary, but we are probably only at around 3% of truly protected land, which I think would meet that particular criteria. And that gives you the scale of the challenge. What is really encouraging is that we're beginning to have those conversations. I thought the Montreal Protocol was excellent. It was widely communicated. It set very clear targets. And national governments will have to act towards meeting it. And it will be very visible if they don't. It will be very visible. So we're starting from a very low point, and we shouldn't hide that element of the challenge, but we're having the right dialogues.
I think I agree. Having those targets built into legislation, that's quite a change, and therefore, when you don't meet those targets, it's an opportunity to focus even more on what the problems are and put pressure on for the resources that are needed. So yeah, I agree with what you said.
I'll just maybe chip in. Of course, there's two elements to the targets. It's protected and effectively managed, and it's critical that we do both aspects. And There's work going on to define what that means with the IUCN UK committee in a UK and country level, and it's a guiding star. We've yet to meet any of our international biodiversity targets, so I'm less worried about that. But in terms of an ambition, it's good and based on reasonable science, and our challenge is to get on and do.
Hi, so I'm Natalie, the People Engagement Officer at Sefton. So I'm based in Natural England, and my question is, how is Natural England going to help support the externally funded projects with red tape? It's coming from Natural England, we've had issues with planning permission, with procurement, and that's coming from internally in Natural England, and it has caused delays of over a year in our side of the project. Is that learning something that Natural England is going to take forward?
Well, something I don't want to get too internal about Natural England, but I think it's something that frustrates me. So we, government, the frameworks that we use to procure things are just incredibly difficult to work with, and I think we're realising, and actually what we've started to do, and I was met with the RSPB yesterday actually, because they procure things quicker and faster and better than we do. So I'm actually sort of using them to procure things for our nature reserves. So you're almost kind of working around the system a bit. So I mean, I think the broader point is, yes, absolutely, it gets in the way, and I think I like Ben's point earlier. It just seems a nonsense that we're applying regulations at this end of the pipe. But they've already been thought through at this end. It just seems bonkers. So part of tackling that challenge is we're not going to be able to move fast enough unless we fix some of those things that you've said. So it's very much in our sights. And the second thing I'd say is that regulation, and I was lead regulation for the last few years for Natural England. The lack of evidence actually really holds us back sometimes, and a lot of the legislation is quite precautionary in the way that it's worded, and you need evidence to break through. So that's why my theme, and I'm a bit of a broken record of this subject, the better evidence that we have, the more and quicker we'll be able to move on nature recovery.
Hi, it's Paul Rooney again. And as we're coming to the close of this fabulous conference, and we've got 5 big influencers, that's an Instagram thing, isn't it? And the panel here, each of you, 1 point, 1 sentence, no constraints, no limits. What would you do for sand dunes tomorrow?
Shall I start this in? For sand dunes and for nature, I would enshrine the role of nature in law as a person to have the same standing as individuals, as companies, all of whom act as an individual. As a few countries are beginning to do, and as Wales started to move in that direction in terms of the Future Generations Act. But if we started to enshrine nature and law and we gave it a voice in our legal system, we would fundamentally change how we supported, protected and restored nature going forward.
I'm not a sand dune expert, but the way I think sometimes sand dunes and other habitats are treated separately to the broader systems around them. So I'd like to see, the thinking around sand dunes spread to, as I think you mentioned this in his talk, the surrounding land, and get into that context. So, I would like to understand how they are part of bigger ecosystem functioning, and then because that gives you a lot more leverage when it comes to sort of managing it dynamically in the long term.
It's kind of quick and get here, but so agree with both of those. One thing. I think the moment is now for sand dunes. You know, within the nature conservation sector, there's this clamour for kind of more dynamic, natural process-led restoration, and there's few better habitats or ecosystems than sand dunes which can demonstrate what that means in practice. And so the moment is now. We should be riding that wave and demonstrating what dynamic natural restoration for future environments means. And what better place to do it than on the beach in the sand dunes.
Okay, I was actually thinking with the previous session, I was thinking around public goods and this whole sort of thought of, you know, public money for public goods, and I was, you know, we work with a number of different habitats, and I was trying to translate that onto sand dune habitat, and there obviously is a lot of public good coming from the sand dunes, and it's attaching a value to that, but it's attaching a value to that more widely than just the people in this room. So people that are willing to fund the work that we want to do, so not just statutory agencies but private finance as well. So yeah, I think it's I'm sort of at heart a site manager myself, so it's always about where's the money coming from to manage the sites, but recognising the real importance of sand dunes culturally, but also you know, as an ecosystem service and as a sort of natural capital. I know some people don't like that word, sorry. Yeah, to help bring in the money that we need to manage them.
Yeah, from my perspective, I mean, Lawton was absolutely right, wasn't he? Bigger, better, more connected. So it is all about just, you know, we've got fantastic views here at Braunton, but, you know, spreading out beyond that, the whole landscape scale approach. You know, if we really are going to address the nature emergency, that's what we've got to do. You know, Braunton in itself, getting that right is really important, but going beyond there is absolutely fundamental. Without that, we will not address the nature emergency. So working on that huge landscape scale is what we've got to do. I've been really interested in Natural England's approach to these kind of super nature reserves now, which seems to be a really good way forward. I think, you know, we can learn from that in Wales and try and follow a similar approach. But it is, you know, these places are essential to get them into better condition. The SSIs, the National Nature Reserves, the SACs, whatever. But you've got to move beyond that as well. And that needs a lot of money and, you know, a lot of political will. And I think in Wales we're in a really good place there. I think we're going in the right direction, but, you know, there's still a long way to go, really. So, but I think we're kind of heading in the right direction.
Okay. Have we been red lighted? We have. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Well, thanks to all the speakers for this session. That's the end of this session, and we're now handing over to. Yes, it is. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, Dave Slater from Natural England is going to finish the close the conference.
Going to go on for another half. But you know. I'd just start by thanking the major funders of the project, because obviously, you know, we wouldn't have been able to do this without EU Life and National Lottery Heritage Fund. It was big, you know, it's a big wad of money, and it's being used. I hope that they see the value that has come from it. Our partners, of course, our own staff in Natural England. I know that many people have been mentioned from different organisations. I'd like to mention Graham Weaver and Sue Rees, actually, and of course Verity Pitts, who just, you know, played a massive role right at the beginning. Of course, you know, National Trust, Plantlife, Natural Resources Wales, Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust, Cornwall Wildlife Trust, and Cumbria Wildlife Trust. I mean, as someone said earlier, there's just such a feeling of sort of collaboration and camaraderie amongst us, and I think it inspires me to go out and forge some new partnerships with the organisations. Landowners, I mean, for me, the real scaling up of this work, you know, you've got to get the landowners on side and to get them involved and get them to be working with you. So here, Christie Devon Estates, I know, has been fantastic working alongside Plantlife and others at Braunton. There's loads of organisations that have contributed. This is what happens with big partnership projects. You accumulate sort of partnerships along the way. Perhaps some of them weren't even planned, but you bring people along. So Ministry of Defence, you know, apparently, I wasn't aware of this, but the MOD Royal Engineers, Group 29, their explosive ordnance clearance, you know,
their sort of contribution amounts to about the equivalent of about £1.8 million from the MOT. So that's absolutely fantastic, the work that they've done on there. Of course, there's the sort of countless amounts of volunteers, and in our sector, the volunteers are really sort of the lifeblood we won't be able to achieve. We've had people on placements, as we heard earlier, bursary recipients, and all the apprentices that have been involved. And if you think about just those people who've been involved and what they're going to go on and do, it's just a fantastic legacy. It's just, absolutely brilliant. There are many staff, as I've mentioned earlier, who've contributed towards the project. And it's so fantastic that all of you are able to meet up in Devon, and I really hope you get a chance. I know there's a Sample Life conference next year, but it's not often we all get together during the pandemic, and these things are just incredibly valuable. So thank you to all of you and all the staff who've worked on the project. All the attendees here, the people who've spoken, and particularly people who've organised this conference, because it's absolutely been, it looks like pretty slick and well organised, and that's not easy with this amount of people and location like this. So thank you to everybody. So I think I probably mentioned everybody. I'm just going to glance. If there's anybody else that I should be mentioning, but so I'm going to bring the conference to a close. I think let's just give everybody in the room a big round of applause and all the organisers. Thank you very much.